Okay, hi everybody. Welcome. Today is December, not December. Today is August 5th or something like that. Maybe it's the 6th. I can look hard to be exact, but today's August 5th. So hope everybody's enjoying August. The temperature is not quite as hot. My beard has not itched does not itch, and hope everyone's doing well. So let me just get started. Just several things. One is just some updates. We've updated three of our apps. You know, the most classic ones we have: the CTisus quiz, the CTisus pearls, and the CTisus lecture series. All within the last couple of weeks have been updated on the Apple Store. Terrific new versions and several other things. The CR, the cinematic rendering app on the chest, has been updated, and that's really spectacular. That's online as well, so hopefully you guys can see that. Also, I've been working on lectures, which we always do. Remember, we release a new lecture every Monday. Often we'll update lectures like CT of the pancreatic cancer, for example. I'll update it every couple of years. What I've been putting a lot of effort on lately is developing new lectures, targeting things a little bit more. So there's lectures on pancreatic cystic lesions like mucinous cystic neoplasms or SPEN tumors, where you have a one or two part lecture only talking about this. Uh, so that becomes very, very important. So doing that. I've also working on, I just finished a two-part lecture on the trachea. I just finished a two-part lecture, I think, on aortic trauma. I'm about to finish an acute abdomen stomach application. So we're doing a lot of new applications, things we haven't done. And then we're going to try to update things that we have done in the past, like lung cancer screening with the latest guidelines. So we are doing that. And then I see we got people saying hello. John Biacchino from Body CT. The IV contrast app is a must-have. Thanks, John. And Marverdi saying hello. Um, so this week I picked this topic called Pixar and medical imaging and 3D imaging. And the reason I came up with that is this week, as of maybe 2 days ago, a new book came out called Pixel, Pixel, by Alvy Ray Smith. And Pixel, which is the little things we talk about within images, and his concept is everything is a pixel. And I won't discuss his book now. I got it yesterday from Amazon, so I started reading it. It's about 540 pages. It goes through the history of pixels, not beginning in 1980 or 1970, but going back to Napoleon's times. So where things got the real history from. So that'll be real. We'll do that. And Alvy Ray Smith is going to be one of my speakers this year on a speaker series. So that should really be a lot of fun. And I spoke with him last week. Haven't spoken in many years. It was like we never left the prior conversation. So it was really good. Now, Alvy Ray Smith, as he told me, when he went to Stanford for his PhD, his goal was to do AI, but he figured at that point AI would never happen in his lifetime, so he went into graphics, which is, he was the one who invented the RGB, doing paint on the computer. He was one of the co-founders with Ed Catmull of Pixar. And he went on to greater things, left Pixar, formed a company that was eventually bought out by Microsoft, and then he was the first Microsoft graphics fellow. So he's just been a tremendous successful career. Now, that made me think about Pixar, because literally in 1986, which is a while ago, 35 years ago, we got our first Pixar system during the summer. Derek Nye, who was a college student then, it was between his junior and senior year, I believe, came and worked with me that summer, and we started programming on the Pixar computer, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, most of you, everyone knows who Pixar is, because of Toy Story and every single 20 or so movies they've done since then, right? Everyone knows that all the billion-dollar movies are from Pixar, all the characters, just very, very touching stories, a couple movies last year and this year. And Pixar is part of Disney. Very successful company, but people don't realize that Pixar was really a spin-off from Lucasfilms. Pixar was developed, the Pixar computer, PIC, Pixar Image Computer, was developed at Lucasfilms to make some of the Star Wars movies, And George Lucas, in his wisdom, recruited Ed Catmull and Alvy Ray Smith and many others, Bob Drebin, Lauren Carpenter, Pat Hanrahan, the who's who of computer science for the past 40 years. And they built this company inside of Lucasfilms. But George Lucas did not want to run a computer company, so when the movies were over, the ones he was doing, he decided he would just close it down. Obviously, there was about 35 or 40 people involved who thought that they had discovered the next great thing, that they would be successful as a standalone company. And they were almost very successful getting funding from companies like GM and Philips. But at the end of the day, some things didn't work out, which is what happens often in venture capital. And Steve Jobs bought the company. Steve ran the company with Ed and Alvy, but they were a hardware company. I still have the Pixar image computer. I have the boards, I have the front, I have the books, got everything. But the company seemed like it would have great promise. I remember I went out there and I worked with them for 5 years. We worked almost 5 years. We did all the medical imaging. And I thought for sure, it was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Problem was it was expensive, it was hard to program, it was the fastest of its time, but it still took us in the beginning a day to do a single rotation of 60 images. We got it down to about an hour eventually. It was 40 MIPS. That was incredible. I remember bragging about 40 MIPS with all these boards, but 40 MIPS is a lot slower than your iWatch. So, but remember, that was 35 years ago, so you got to realize times have changed. Pixar was going to look at medical imaging, and Philips invested, I think, like $20 million to buy a bunch of computers, and they were going to be in defense, they were going to be in motion pictures. I think Disney was one of the people involved. They were going to be in seismic because they were able to analyze data for oil fields and stuff like that, spy satellites, all this great stuff. And I believed every bit of it. But it was true. Incredible scientists, incredible people. You look at whether it was Bob Drebin, who went to AMD, and then Apple, Lauren Carpenter, who's still there, Pat Hanrahan, who left and went to Princeton, and then back to Stanford, and then eventually formed Tableau Software, which was worth many billions of dollars when it was sold a couple of years ago. So many successful people, and I left out a lot of names, Tom Cook, all these people who were just massive successes in their fields, all were at Pixar. It was the single greatest place for graphics in the world for at least a 5 or 7 or 8 year period. So in saying that, they started, and that's how we started doing 3D imaging. Now, at the end, they couldn't make the computer cheap enough or fast enough, and then other people came along like Silicon Graphics that was really good at making faster and cheaper computers. Silicon Graphics became the key person. Pixar gave up 1991, and Steve reformed the company to make movies. 5 years later, there was Toy Story, and 5 years later, the company went public, and Steve had his success after Apple Computer, made a lot of money, and life was good. So that's a very happy ending to a story. The Pixar years, those hardware years, were never, in retrospect, it was always a challenge, right? They were fighting for funding, fighting to get product. They looked incredible at meetings. It was always the best technology. No one argued about technology, but the best technology often does not win. You had to use Pixar coding. You had to do a lot of things that were somewhat difficult and challenging. And you couldn't get it cheap enough. You know, it was $250,000. Eventually they got it down to $120,000, but you needed a Sun workstation as the front end, and the Sun workstation was $150,000 to begin with, and then it was maybe down to $50,000 or $30,000. So it was just a very expensive process, and it was hard. You know, it was the dawn of graphics. And so it was really hard to make a lot of money. You could not sell the number of machines you needed to make it a viable company and a viable business. But on the other hand, it was the push that did 3D imaging. Till then, there were these black and white images. You could spend hours making images on a DEC digital imaging computer. Very slow go, very difficult, very crude images. Pixar RGB alpha channel, 4 channels. You're able to do color. You're able to really show the difference between soft tissue, muscle, and bone, which you couldn't do before. So there were many, many things that Pixar led to. We got involved. We wrote articles from the late 80s till today. We've gone from those hardwares to SGI. We've gone from SGI to boards, and now everything we do is on NVIDIA boards. And NVIDIA, and those little boards for a few $100s can do what you can do for $500,000, 35 years, and a lot more than 40 MIPS. NVIDIA, you can do everything in real time. So just tremendous change. But I think it's important to realize where things come from. So from the movie industry is how I got medical imaging, okay? It also makes the point that sometimes the people who are the leaders, the people at the front end, often aren't the ones who are around to benefit, in the sense that it takes a while for technology to really find its steps. I sent Alvy Ray Smith, who I started talking about in the beginning, a copy of my recent lecture I gave, which is on CTisus, and a couple of slides in there talk about the challenges of getting reimbursed, the challenges of 3D becoming mainstream. Now, he didn't have a voiceover for my lecture, he just had the slides. I wanted to show him some of the stuff we're doing with cinematic rendering and things like that. But he noticed, and he mentioned to me, he goes, Elliot, from your slides 17 and 18, 19, I realized that nothing's changed. Still, 3D is not mainstream. And we argued about that 35 years ago. And I told him, despite my best efforts, despite my assumption that things would have been done in the early 90s and mid 90s and late 90s and the 20s, and go on and on today, I mentioned it was reimbursement. It was a thing where the surgeons love it, but the radiologists don't get paid to do it, and the radiologists won't do anything they don't get paid for, which is rightly so. The whole RVU, the way things are done, it's not the outcomes, but it's this numbers game, and it's just the way it is. Not to argue about that today. That's maybe an argument for a different day, but it does make the point that when you're doing and you want to do great things or new things, you don't necessarily need to discover everything yourself. You need to find out what other people are doing. And it's not just in your industry. As I said, I flew out to Pixar. Actually, I flew out initially, it was called Lucasfilm, some little company, right? Oh my God, I went to Lucasfilms. And I probably told you the story that I went there, I had a nice 3-piece suit on, hair was combed, I was shaven. And then I got there was no one wearing socks. I can tell you, there was a 4250 Kerner Boulevard in San Rafael. That's where they were. An unmarked building, big building, Lucasfilms. But the point was that it was a time and a place where great things happened, and they weren't wearing suits. They weren't wearing socks. I apologize about 100 times a day for wearing a suit, because once you have a 3-piece suit, there's not a whole lot you can do. At that point, you can't flip up your jeans and your sneakers and your whatever. So it was wonderful. I'm always to this day grateful to the people at Pixar and the people who helped me out and basically helped me build my career, because they were the kindest people. Our relationship was a good one, and it's a good recommendation to people when you're working with other people outside of medicine. It's a win-win, because what you're trying to do is different. What they're trying to do is different than you, but it works closely together. I think the idea of this confluence of brilliance, it's like people who are working now with NVIDIA. NVIDIA has the greatest people in the world, from the CEO, Jensen Huang, and Kimberly Powell, and everybody else. It's just a level of superstars across their whole platform. But if you can work with them, they're not trying to read films. They're trying to make you read films better, or use AI to change the outcome of patients, or AI to change how we practice medicine. But you're not going to do it on your own, because the talent. I gave a talk at Pixar, 1986. The people in that room, I don't think I've ever been in a room with that much talent. Those are the people who changed the world. Steve Jobs wasn't there that day, but beyond him, they all changed the world of everything we do today. But it was those people who kind of inspired me, but also showed me what we could do. I think one of the challenges is you really don't know what you can do when you're in your domain, only in your domain. And I think one of the challenges of COVID, we're not traveling. I travel, I don't travel that much, though people think I must travel a lot. But I would have been at Pixar, I would have been at Apple at their new place already, I would have visited Reed Jobs at Emerson in San Francisco, I would have been many different places. We're working with Microsoft, I would have been in Seattle. It's those interactions with people. You could do it on Zoom, and we are doing things on Zoom, but it's not the same. You don't have the conversations the same way. You don't have the dinners and the lunches and the coffee breaks where you really get to see things and you get to feel things and you hear things that maybe weren't the focus of the conversation, but as you listen to them, become the focus of the conversation, and you realize what you can do and what you're missing. So I think that to me is the biggest challenge of COVID. People like us do not benefit from the friends we have, from the friends we're going to make. Because you're not making new friends, you're making someone on Zoom and it's very nice, but it's so boring. There's no intensity. There's no friendship. I mentioned Alvy Ray Smith, that was 1985, 86. That's 36 years ago. Even though you haven't seen each other for a while, you knew each other. You were sharing the space in this world. And I think that's something that's really missing in the COVID era. That you're just not making the acquaintances, you're not doing that human bonding, that interaction that happens without you doing anything, without planning or thinking. It's just the humanity of it all. So I think I'm running out of time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I think the point is, when you're doing something, you got to look around. You got to look around beyond your table and see what can be done, what people are doing, what success is there potentially. You know, I spoke with Microsoft, and I won't go through the whole story, but I said to people who were so brilliant, I said to the person in charge, I said, listen, what it's going to take for you to work with me? I just decided I wasn't going to beat around the bush. What is it going to take for you to work with me? What do I have to do? What's the process? And we are working on a plan to work together on some very, very exciting things, which we can talk about some other time when I get things finished. But you don't know where your next collaboration is. You don't know what it is you're able to do. And particularly, you know, medicine now, like everything in the world, requires a village. You need to be working with people who have skill sets you don't have, people who think differently than you, people who challenge you. And I think then, and only then, can you really do your best. And in this COVID era, I think you have to be careful that we don't drop down to mediocrity. We don't get to the point where, oh, we got to get the work done and that's it. I've always said that there's a much bigger danger in the COVID era for academics than private practice, because we all can read the films and we need to read them well because we're taking care of patients. So that is paramount to what we do. But then in academics, where the teaching suffers when you're not in person, where the research suffers when you're not meeting people, where your ability to think and plan and do great things, especially things that you don't know about today. You can't just be building, if you have a doghouse, you don't want to be building a better doghouse. You know, it's the Henry Ford thing. Ask people what they want. In the 1880s, 1890s, they wanted a faster horse. No one asked for a car because a car didn't exist. You really need to figure out a way of making things better. So I think that's very exciting. Now let me look at the questions. On Verity, 3D software expensive to install, no extra payment for work. That's a bottleneck. Yeah, it's not that expensive anymore, but the no reimbursement is a killer, particularly when your boss is looking at your RVUs. And radiologists look at RVUs because that's how many people get paid. So that's a big problem, and I've been arguing over that for years. But that's a topic for another day. And So with that, I'll stop there. I hope everybody has a great day, has a great early August, and I'll see you back here next week. Be good.